Impact, effect, influence. The King Center's 2022 experiences, programs, messaging, and initiatives were derived from our theme for the year. It starts with me, shifting priorities to create the beloved community. The King Center published a powerful children's book, It Starts With Me, which was co-authored by King Center CEO Dr. Bernice A. King and Dr. Kimberly P. Johnson. Our Dynamic Students with King program continued to influence students, educators, and schools with historical perspectives and leadership lessons from civil rights leaders, members of the King family, and friends of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Mrs. Coretta Scott King. Our combined Students with King programming reached over 800,000 youth. The beloved Community Leadership Academy is committed to developing the next generation of compassionate, courageous, conscientious, nonviolent leaders who think critically to solve pressing world issues. The beloved Community Leadership Academy engaged over 100 students from 5 continents. True respect, love, diversity, understanding, honor. The beloved Community Expo attendees experienced different cultures, languages, musical performances, and food.
Hi, everybody. I just came from the U.S. I flew to Liberia. Yeah. And in 2 hours, guess what? I was in Ghana. And I just left Nigeria. I'm on my way to India. Thank you. So I will see you in India. Bye.
Building on our 50-plus year history as a leader in nonviolence training and education, the King Center launched our Nonviolence 365 e-learning course. This NV365 online masterclass, which has been translated into 6 languages and adapted into a 3-hour workplace edition, features veterans of the civil rights movement, some of Dr. King's most essential readings, speeches, and teachings, world-class instructors and practitioners of nonviolence. The King Center hosted beloved community talks, live stream events that called humanity up to compassionate action and powerful reflection regarding the triple evils of militarism, racism, and poverty.
We have a moral responsibility to speak up, to stand up, to show up, and never shut up until all of our brothers and sisters can rise from the shackles of oppression, depression, suppression, and the real violence of poverty.
From the Poor People's Campaign Moral Assembly in Washington, D.C., to voting rights and galvanizing voters, to raising our voice for changing gun laws, the King Center and King Center CEO, Dr. Bernice A. King, carried on the legacy of our namesake and our founder of advocating for a just, humane, equitable, and peaceful world. Each of us can be great. Each of us can serve. It starts with me. It's about us. Donate to the King Center by texting MLK Give to 44321.
Good afternoon. I'm Jocelyn Dorsey, a retired broadcast manager and journalist from WSB-TV in Atlanta, and I'm honored to be your host this afternoon for this important conversation on the 55th anniversary of the assassination of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It was a dark day in American history as a civil rights leader was shot and killed on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee in 1968. First, I'd like to give you a bit of a historical perspective. It was February 1st, 1968, when the Memphis sanitation workers, Robert Walker and Echo Cole, were killed in a sanitation truck. Their deaths sparked the Memphis sanitation strike 11 days later, when 1,300 men walked off the job. Dr. King interrupted his plans for the Poor People's Campaign and went to Memphis to aid striking sanitation workers in response to an invitation by Reverend James Lawson, pastor of Centenary Methodist Church and advisor to the strikers. Dr. King spoke at a rally in Memphis on March 18th of 1968. At March 28th march was halted due to the illegal violent actions of students who weren't a part of Dr. King's team. Dr. King and fellow SCLC leaders negotiated with the contentious city officials in Memphis and assured their commitment to nonviolence and planned another march for April 8th, 1968. On April 3rd, Dr. King gave his final sermon in Memphis during the strike. He told the audience, quote, "I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land." Dr. King was assassinated the very next evening. But on April 8th, 1968, Mrs. Coretta Scott King, accompanied by 3 of her 4 children, led the planned march in support of the Memphis sanitation workers. Today, MLK55, Transforming Unjust Economic Systems, will be a virtual dialogue that brings a fresh perspective to the questions: where do we go from here? And how do we overcome economic inequities and injustices in our world house? There will be a time for questions from you, our viewers, and I would ask that you pose those questions in the comment section of your respective platforms, and we will get to them after the discussion. But leading the discussion is Dr. Bernice A. King, who is Chief Executive Officer of the Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change, better known as the King Center. She's a global thought leader, strategist, solutionist, orator, and peace advocate. She continues to advance her parents' legacy of nonviolent social change through policy, advocacy, research, as well as education and training through the Kingian philosophy of nonviolence, which she rebranded as Nonviolence 365. In 2020, she was influential in encouraging Atlanta business leaders to actively support major racial equity and social justice issues, including the successful passage of Georgia's hate crime legislation. She received both a Juris Doctorate and Master of Divinity degree from Emory University and a bachelor's degree in psychology from Spelman College. Dr. King has received numerous awards and recognitions. In 2021, she received the Atlanta Business Chronicle's Lifetime Achievement Award for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Additionally, the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation honored her in 2020 with her highest award, the Phoenix Award, which recognizes individuals who've made significant contributions to society. She also received an honorary Doctor of Divinity from Wesley College and Clinton College, an honorary Doctor of Humane Letters from Spelman College, and an honorary Doctor of Laws from Grinnell College. As a noted author, she has to her credit Hard Questions, Heart Answers, as well as the children's book entitled It Started With Me, which is part of the King Center Beloved movement. And joining Dr. King is Dr. Russ Wigginton, who serves as the president of the National Civil Rights Museum at the historic Lorraine Motel. He assumed this role August 1st of 2021. He brings a vast experience in education, fundraising, operations, and community engagement to his current role. Prior to assuming this role, Dr. Wigginton served as the Chief Post-Secondary Impact Officer for Tennessee State Collaborative on Reforming Education, known as SCORE. He also served as Vice President for Student Life and Dean of Students at Rhodes College. Dr. Wigginton graduated from Rhodes College with a Bachelor of Arts degree in history and earned a doctorate in history from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. He published a book entitled The Strange Career of the Black Athlete, African Americans in Sports, as well as articles and essays on African American social and labor history. He serves on numerous civic boards and advisory committees, including the National Civil Rights Museum, the Memphis Zoo, New Memphis Institute, Arts Memphis, Overton Park Conservancy, Big Brothers Big Sisters, and Ballet Memphis. Incidentally, the National Civil Rights Museum is located at the historic Lorraine Motel, where the civil rights leader, Dr. Martin Luther King, was assassinated, and it's the only museum of its kind to give a comprehensive overview of the American Civil Rights Movement from 1619 to present. It's a Smithsonian affiliate and an internationally acclaimed cultural institution, and it's recognized by USA Today as the top 10 best American iconic attractions and top tourist attraction by the Memphis Business Journal. Prestigious panelists, welcome. First, I'd like to get your reflections on what this day should mean to all Americans. Dr. King?
Well, let me just personally respond. It's a very difficult day for me, as you can imagine. As I get older, I get a little bit more emotional about it because it was a day that fundamentally altered our lives as a family and obviously altered the state of racial and social and economic justice in our nation. And with that in mind, as we think about this day, I think it's important that we always remember where Dr. King was focusing his attention. Because as you look at the triple evils that he talked about, that being poverty, racism, and militarism, we have made very little progress as it relates to the issue of poverty, of economic injustice. And I think this is a time for us to reflect on what he was doing and recommitting ourselves to doubling up our efforts to work towards the eradication of the triple evils, but especially working towards a more economically just world society. And each one of us have a role and responsibility in this effort. We each have areas of influence. You know, a large part of where we are today has a lot to do with a lack of education. You know, people are just not well informed on what the issues are. I mean, we know generally, but we lack a lot of specifics. And I think that's why the work that we do at the King Center and the work that they do at the National Civil Rights Museum is so important, because as we are more well educated, we have the tools and the knowledge, at least, to position us to develop the strategies that are necessary to effectuate change.
Dr. Wigginton?
I think he's on mute.
Your words are powerful and poignant. I'm honored to be in this conversation on this somber and yet important day at the National Civil Rights Museum in this country and in this world. You mentioned the economic injustice as one of the three evils. And I tend to think about that as an issue that too often we allow to sort of lay dormant and normalize the importance and the tragedy of people not being able to know where their next meal's coming from, know if they're going to have a roof over their head, know that they can tend to even the most basic of medical care. All of those things surround and are interwoven with what it means to be in poverty and the economic injustice associated with it. On this day, it is so important for us to think about where your father, where Dr. King was headed when he made the determination that the work needed to be done in Memphis, because it symbolized what the Poor People's Campaign was fundamentally about. Making workers, everyday workers, proud workers, workers with dignity, making them invisible in our society. And so the work that we do at the National Civil Rights Museum, the work that we are embarking upon as we step into the renovation of our legacy building, where the alleged shot was fired that led to the demise of Dr. King, allows us to step more fully into the work of the Poor People's Campaign. And with the support of so many others, including the King Center, we are going to make progress because we have to make progress. Thank you.
And thank you both. And I should mention that, to our viewers, we are going to have a conversation. Both of your mics are open. I want you to feel free to interject on any of the questions that I ask. And we are going to get to the economic issues of the day, but I can't help but recognize the fact that just yesterday, there were thousands of students who marched on the Tennessee Capitol, protesting gun violence. And, the irony of Dr. King being assassinated today certainly harkens back to the issue of violence and gun violence specifically. I just want to get your all's thoughts about that and what we're seeing today.
Well, if I can just say, as we all know, young people have always been the energy and the fervor and the strength of all movements for social change. And I'm always so proud when young people stand up for what they believe is the right thing to do. So I first applaud them in what they're doing. This issue that they're standing tall in is well past being addressed. It should not have to take this kind of effort, but we are living in times where what my father and them did, which was to really sacrifice their very lives, sacrifice their jobs, sacrifice their homes, sacrifice everything. We are right back at that place. And as we know, young people don't have much to lose. They have everything to gain because it's their present and their future. The only thing that I wish, and I've said this before across the nation as I've talked to different audiences, I wish there was a way to really organize them in a way that their walkout is not a day, but it's the Montgomery bus protest, that we refuse to return to school until there is some significant legislation that bans assault weapons. My father was assassinated with a rifle. That would be the equivalent of what we call assault weapons today. And 55 years later, we're just increasing, the access, to these instruments. And yes, I agree that people will find other means, because if the impulse is there to be violent, and you've not been developed and trained and exposed to how to manage conflict, if society, we haven't addressed those economic conditions that make people more vulnerable to these kinds of things, then people will find a way to express it. But the issue is that these are deadly instruments. We should not have them in society. What is the purpose of them? We have more guns than we have people. And every day I keep saying, how many more guns do people need? You have two hands. How many more instruments do you need? And the thing that really was riveting to me and such a profound message happened to come through a movie called The Rise of the Planet Apes. When I watched that movie, Caesar, the main character there, the ape there, he said something that I wish was really deep in our heart and our soul, and we fundamentally understood it as a humanity. He said to another ape, apes don't kill apes. I was like, whoa. If we got that, we would see a fundamental change in gun control, because we're just packing up, planning for something, which is totally unnecessary. What we need to do is develop the capacity to love each other, to be compassionate, to create just and equitable circumstances in this world. And so I applaud these young people, and I hope that what they are doing today will become contagious.
Dr. Wigginton?
I think what Dr. King captured is the fundamental essence of humanity. And without that, it leaves us prey to inhumanity. And that has manifested all too many times through so much of the violence that we have seen, most often coming through guns. I agree, and it's hard not to think about the students here in Tennessee and the young people all across the country. As somebody who spent many years on a college campus, I get my energy from young people. They have this brilliant naivete that you only can capture at a certain time. And I love it. I love their passion. I love their conviction. And frankly, I love their naivete. I want us, as Dr. King alluded to, I'll say this, our responsibility as non-young people is to make sure they have the context and fullness of understanding what they are attempting to do. And all we have to do is point back to the movement that Dr. King and other leaders showed us the way. So Montgomery is a wonderful example. If young people today understood the strategy, we underestimate the strategic lenses in which those activities took place. We do have to educate. We do have to make people know that Rosa Parks did not get tired one day. She was part of a political and strategic inner circle and machine, quite frankly, that allowed for that boycott to have lasting power and unprecedented influence in beginning the process of having African Americans, particularly in the South, be seen as humans, to be seen as people who deserved an equitable place at the collective table.
And the thing is, I think you captured something that a lot of people don't understand, and I'd like for both of you to comment on the fact that nonviolence isn't just a spur of the moment thing. It has to be taught. And I know, Dr. King, that you teach nonviolence in Nonviolence 365, but give people a sense of what that means, that it's not just, like you say, marching out one day. It really is a study of how to behave and how to act.
Exactly. But even before it is a study, it's a mindset. It's a love-centered way, as we define it, a love-centered way of thinking, speaking, acting, and engaging that leads to personal, cultural, and societal transformation. So it's grounded in some principles that understand the dignity, the worth, and the value of all humankind, regardless of whether or not they are adversaries, opponents, or enemies. At the end of the day, we want to preserve humanity. And we want to fight injustice and not defeat and destroy people. And so every campaign that was undertaken, that was at the core and the center of it as they engaged in these acts. You know, that's why you didn't see them cussing, back at those who come. You didn't see them spitting upon those who spat upon them, or seeking to beat those who beat them, because they understood it was more powerful to stand in the strength of love and resistance than to try to retaliate, because the issue is injustice. And I want the society, I want the world, I want the community to see this injustice, because if I engage at the same level, then that injustice goes unnoticed, because then it becomes about the fight. So they understood that it's a discipline. Nonviolence is a discipline. Nonviolence creates a sustainable outcome, but it's not something people will say, well, if that's the case, why is this happening? Why is this happening? Because nonviolence is like prescription medicine. Your blood pressure, if you have hypertension, when your blood pressure goes up, you take medicine. The reason it does not go up every day is because you are taking your medicine every day. Nonviolence, as Dr. King taught it, is not a tactic. It is a way of life. And that is what we teach. It helps us to frame the issue so people are clear on what they're galvanizing about. It helps to educate the people so that you grow the coalition of those that you want to be a part of the engagement, because the greater the number of people, at least if there's a critical mass, the tendency is that more people will pay attention to what's happening and be willing to at least say, okay, there's something here we need to pay attention to and address. It can create win-win outcomes, and also, if necessary, and this is very critical, because now people have seen nonviolence as equal to direct action. Direct action is a part of a greater strategy. Direct action is not nonviolence. Of course, you encourage people to undertake their direct actions in a nonviolent posture, in a peaceful way, and to resist the injustice. But at the end of the day, nonviolent direct action is just part of the greater strategy to bring creative tension, as Daddy would call it, to what is happening, and cause the people who have been intransigent and have been defiant to come to a negotiation table, or come back if it's any good negotiations have fallen off. But the ultimate goal in nonviolence is the beloved community. That's why, you begin with the end in mind. If the end is just to destroy and defeat, to win over people, then you probably will resort to violent tactics and means. But if the end is community, if the end is redemption, if the end is reconciliation, if the end is a community at peace with itself, then you have no choice but to embrace and practice and understand nonviolence. And people can go to the King Center .org or the King Center Institute.org, and they can sign up for our Nonviolence 365 e-learning, as we have a 16 to 18 hour course, self-paced, or we have a 3.5 hour workplace edition.
Dr. Wigginton.
It's so important to understand that the discipline, the fortitude, the conviction, and the study of nonviolence as a means of life is critical to how we are going to eventually, hopefully, get to a place in our society where so many of the conversations that we are still having, we will no longer need to have, and certainly no longer need to have them at the level that we do. What is critical at this particular moment in our American experiment is places like the King Center and places like the National Civil Rights Museum that focus on this work every day, create space, educational opportunities, places for convening, for uncomfortable conversations. That work is methodical and it's not part-time. Because in our current society, we too often are looking for the quick fix, the short-term solution, and thinking less about sustainability. And I often refer back to the framing of how you think about races, as Dr. King himself did. This is not a sprint, it is a marathon. And marathons can require your attention to wax and wane. You can pay attention to a sprint because you know it's going to be over in a very few seconds. But a marathon, there's an ebb and flow. There are moments of wondering whether you're going to finish. There are moments where you get rejuvenated. There are moments where you are certain to endure pain. And then there's crossing the finish line or exceeding your creating a space for your personal best. And when I think about nonviolence as a fundamental strategy, when I think about what we've done over the last 60 years without the full implementation, or the last 55 years in particular, without the full and sustained implementation, the data shows us that without doing something different with intentionality, we're unlikely to make the kind of progress that we deserve as a people, not just in the United States, but across the globe.
And the thing that I fear, and you know, the communication is so critical. And to me, you know, you have people who fear. We're going to turn to the economic issues. And one of the biggest issues that we are talking about is wealth disparity. And a lot of people didn't realize that Dr. King was focusing on this, especially as it related to Memphis and the sanitation workers strike that was going on there. And it doesn't seem that we've made a lot of progress in that, because it seems as if people fear the discussion of equity in terms of wealth or reparations or all of that. So how do we use the strategies that Dr. King had to begin to apply that to this present day so we can break through those barriers of fear?
Well, you know, a lot of fear is based in ignorance. Not all fear, but a lot of it is based in ignorance. And I think we've allowed the fear mongering around all of these issues to dominate and control those narratives. And we have not been loud enough, persistent, and intentional enough in making sure that the masses understand, like when you speak of reparations, or even when you speak about ensuring that people have economic stability, you're not talking about taking away from anybody else. You know, oftentimes people think, you know, you're taking away, or you are just giving handouts. And that's not the case. That, you know, there may be select instances, you know, where people have taken advantage of situations like that, but that's not the majority. You know, Mayor Michael Tubbs, when he was mayor of Stockton, California, engaged in a pilot around my father's guaranteed annual income, and a select group of people were given $500 a month. And they did the data around it. The majority, if not all of the people, use that money for their basic day-to-day needs, and it spread. And so there's now mayors for guaranteed income around this nation, and it works. But you know, it does take a lot of effort, as I said, to educate and train. We have to understand it's deeper than what people may be thinking. When Daddy called for the redistribution of wealth, you know, people said that was socialism. It's interesting that as soon as some corporation gets in trouble, or the corporate sector, is a sector in the corporate world gets in trouble, we are, you know, we quickly find a way to rescue them, to bail them out. But when individuals are in that situation, we want to bring the criticism or bring up the idea of this is socialism. And it is not. It is doing the same exact thing. Those people need a footing as well. And we saw it in the pandemic when we gave out the child credit. You know, it helps because we have a system right now where money is unequally distributed, and opportunities, more importantly. And so this notion is also about policies and practices. You know, for instance, you know, it's hard to own a home if you have a poor credit rating. And that's why I, along with one of my Leadership Atlanta classmates, started Ready Life, which allows people to be qualified for a home, a mortgage on our platform, which is a fintech platform, by paying their rent on time. I mean, go figure. Why don't we use rent in the credit world? There's something behind that, you know, because we know that many of our people of our hue, are renting. And so if we allow that, then more of them would become homeowners. So we really do have to educate people to see where all of these disparities exist, and how all of this can work that enhances, you know, our economy. When people do well, the economy does well. When people do well, our society is much safer. And so I think it's important that we have these conversations over and over again to dispel some of these myths, and also to help to overcome some of the fears that people have.
And historically, Dr. Wigginton, we look at, you know, what has happened in Memphis, and look at Memphis today among especially sanitation workers, for example. And we look to the fact that 88% of the senior level sanitation workers are held by white people, though the department is majority Black. So, you know, have we really made progress? And if not, what do we do about that disparity?
Yeah, I think the progress, several things can be true. You can point to areas where there's been progress. However, the challenge today is that the need to incorporate nuance into situations. One of the things that was the case 50, 60 years ago is that the divide was so crass and stark. It was you could close your eyes and still see it. Now we have just enough difference, just enough nuance to complicate the story. People aren't comfortable having this conversation about wealth disparity because I think two interrelated reasons. The first one is most of us, the overwhelming majority of us, did not come by our success or lack thereof based fundamentally on what we did. It's the byproduct of our legacy, our family trajectory, our trust fund, our debt, all of these things. And so it makes it hard to really look at the individual as being fully responsible when you're step into childhood with a deck that's already been dealt. Interrelated with that is we don't like talking about economic justice because that requires us to keep dipping back in time until we hit that era, that 250-year era called slavery. Mm-hmm. There's no way you can step back into how economic justice manifests itself without talking about slavery. And we as a country have yet to do that in a comprehensive, civil, and way that infiltrates the complexity that topic deserves. We want to pick one-off responses about what slavery was. Not almost as if we don't appreciate that it was a 250-year institution. How can you summarize an institution of that magnitude, all the components, in a one-off comment? And so in order for us, I believe, in order for us to make progress on the fundamental economic justice situation, we have to recognize that the starting place for most people has been predetermined, with the understanding that there are always going to be exceptions. And it doesn't predetermine where you will end up, but we have to recognize the starting place for the overwhelming majority of people has been predetermined. And that's not an equitable place.
And I don't want to make a generalization, but we as people of color recognize that. It's other people who may not recognize that and don't. How do we break that barrier? Because you hear so often that people are saying, well, you know, I didn't do that. My parents didn't do that. And so why should I be held accountable for that 250 years? And what would you say to that?
We're all held accountable to all of our ancestry. It comes with the territory. If we are willing to benefit from our history and our ancestry, then we should be willing and understand that there are some costs that come with that and responsibility. I think creating more spaces where conversations can happen is an important place, with the understanding that walking into the room, these are going to be uncomfortable. And they're uncomfortable across the spectrum. It's not as if talking about economic justice, even connected to slavery, we should not assume that's a comfortable conversation for African Americans. There's a lot of baggage that comes with that as well that we have carried over the years. So this is not a comfortable conversation for anybody. But if we make a commitment to enter it through the lenses that Dr. King talked about, through civility, through humanity, through respect, it is a foundational point for people to recognize this is not about pointing fingers at anybody today, but it is about pointing a collective finger to all of us from yesteryear. And we have an obligation to work toward remedies, just in the same way we point back to the Constitution conveniently when we want it to mean something. We should point back to the 13th and 14th Amendment and the reasons why those had to come into play.
Can I add just a little piece, very, very, very small piece, as a part of that conversation? While it is true that most of us that are Black in America descended from slaves, we also have to include in our conversations that not all of us did. Some of us descended from free Blacks in our country. While it is true that most who enslaved are were white Americans, it's also true that there are some who descended from white Americans who didn't enslave. Some of them are descendants of abolitionists. So as we have the conversation, I think sometimes our language and our comprehensiveness is very important, because if we have it in the wrong way, where it seems like it's overly slanted, I think that's what causes people to shut down as well. I find a lot of times when I say stuff like that in conversations, it drops some of the defenses in the white community that they're able to better hear, but there's a major majority disproportionate issue that we have to address in this nation. And as he said, we all have a responsibility. So I can't say it better than he said it.
Dr. King.
Yeah.
That's part of that nuance, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And what we don't do is recognize the complexity because of our country and how it manifests. And all of those things you mentioned are part of the story. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, that's an important thing for everyone to remember. And I don't want to dominate all the questions, because I did say that some of the people could ask questions on their own. And so hopefully if you have those questions now, I would be willing to take some questions that we would ask of our panelists to get some answers, because I know we don't have a lot of time remaining. This conversation has gone so quickly. And, I would invite, I know they're going to send me some questions on the chat, and until I see them, I'm going to continue to ask some of the questions. All labor has dignity, and that is the thing that a lot of us don't see. And I want to, because we talk about the sanitation workers and we talk about the pandemic and how, the pandemic certainly pointed to first responders as not just police and fire, but healthcare workers and all of that. How do we continue to play out that significance of all work and all labor has dignity?
Dr. King, would you like me to start, or would you like to start?
Yeah, you can go ahead.
So you probably sensed my aggressiveness with that, because of all of the memorable quotes that your father articulated over his time. Without question, that is my favorite. It is no coincidence that I also studied labor history in graduate school. And it's because I believe what that statement represents, and I'm going to go right back to it. It's the recognition of each person as having value, of being worthwhile, and mattering not just to his or her family, but to society at large. And what I've always appreciated about all types of work is that in too many cases, we try to correlate jobs that are romanticized or seen as quote unquote more important, as if those folks work harder. Mm-hmm. When in fact, when you think about all labor having dignity, the converse is true in so many cases. You have to look no further than the pandemic of who were determined to be essential workers. That word essential has dignity, should have dignity. And so the folks who get up every day doing what it takes, how many hours that it takes, how many different versions of jobs to put food on the table and clothes on the back of their children and create space to hopefully have them receive a respectable education so they can reach their full potential. Tell me how those folks are less important or less human than anyone else. So yes, all work and all labor has dignity. And that is fundamental to us beginning the process of achieving economic justice in this country.
And I think it's just highlighted by, the very thing that my father was doing, which was, bringing attention to sanitation workers who many from a day to day overlook, don't think about, take for granted, when the reality is all of what we do individually is interconnected and interrelated. It takes every single uh, job, um, every single position to make the whole work. If the sanitation workers just take a week or two off, we're in trouble.
Big trouble.
If those that we called essential workers decided we are not showing up during the pandemic, we all would have been threatened. Every one of us, I don't care who you are in terms of your political ideology, your religious affiliation, your gender identity, your race, your ethnicity, whatever category you want, all of us have come through a teacher. Every one of us. And yet the value that we have placed on that profession alone is problematic to me versus the value we place on those who are in our entertainment and sporting arena. Now, I'm not hating on them, but I think what Daddy was saying is there's an imbalance in this society, and we've got to find a way to create, to understand what he said, that every human being matters. And so our priorities in the way in which we distribute wealth, the way in which we determine income has to be looked at in a whole different vein.
And as we begin to wind up the conversation, I hear, complaints. People love to complain about everything.
Mm-hmm.
But what do you suggest we do as individuals to change the trajectory of some of the things that we're complaining about? Dr. King.
Well, I mean, if you are not, we say the idle mind is a devil's workshop. If you are not tied and connected to efforts to address these inequitable and unjust circumstances and situations in our society, then you're left to your mind and your those idle thoughts. But when you're participating in something like that, it doesn't mean you don't level complaints, but now you're in the realm where you now are part of making a difference, and it changes the equation. So I think that's one of the things. There's so many opportunities out there for people to get involved. And not sit on the sidelines and complain. That's what I would say to everybody. Find a space and a place that lines up with what you are concerned about and what you're passionate about, more importantly, because passion is what's going to give you greater sustainability. Feel good, because guess what? As he said earlier, and we all know it, this is a marathon, and it's a marathon that is not just one person. It's not one generation. You're passing a baton. So we're all running this marathon, and you may not see, the results of the things that you're complaining about in terms of all of it manifesting, but you certainly will experience some kind of a success in the process that you can celebrate. And gives you further hope to keep continuing to engage.
That's brilliantly said. I have nothing to add to
that. Don't do that. I'm sure you do have something to add to that.
Well, I mean, it was so well said. I do think the ability to participate is so important, as Dr. King said. One of the things it does is it turns critique into solution-minded stance. You begin to identify, that might not be working well, but now understand how hard it is to change, and I'm willing to put the time in to help make the change, and I'm willing to be a part of community that's also willing to make the change. And I'm willing to do it, even though I know it's going to take a long time and it may not happen in my lifetime. That's a powerful place to be.
Mhm.
And it's not disconnected from the importance of being a part of and a essential part of community and finding one's community for the greater good. That sets us on a course, I believe, that can make that marathon maybe a little bit shorter, instead of feeling like
Yes.
we have to take on the massive piece of the problem by ourselves or with only a few others.
So when you look at your to-do lists, both of you, and you say, what's on the top of your to-do list? As we end this conversation, what's going to be on the top of your to-do list?
I'm just going to continue what I'm doing. My mother started this whole effort at getting people to understand that nonviolence is a way of life. And at the top of my to-do list is to continue to develop a means and a way to create a critical mass of people who become nonviolent practitioners in every arena of human life, because I firmly believe that, as my mother said, oftentimes, that if we're going to get to a just, humane, equitable, and peaceful world, we're going to have to go by Martin and his teachings. And I now understand that, and I'm committed to that. And I see what I'm doing as fulfilling something that my father highly suggested during his Nobel Peace Prize lecture. He said, I suggest that the philosophy and strategy of nonviolence immediately become a subject of study and serious experimentation in every field of human conflict, by no means excluding relations between nations. And so I'm pressing real hard into this, no matter how long it takes to get people to buy into it and get it. We talk about it. We need to study Dr. King. We need to understand Dr. King. But people are just slow to connect the dots. But I'm here to stay as long as God gives me the strength and the breath to do it.
And we certainly appreciate the fact that you have taken on the battle and to continue to raise the awareness, because that's so important, especially given your platform. Dr. Wigginton, your to-do list.
My to-do list is to make sure that the spirit and the sentiment and the range of emotions and the intellectual curiosity that so many people are going to feel today on our courtyard at the Lorraine Motel is captured and refiltered, if you will, throughout everybody that we can touch across this world. I'm committed to this renovation that we're embarking upon at the National Civil Rights Museum of the Legacy Building, to make sure that the stories that we tell are aligned and consistent with the powerful stories in the Lorraine Motel, that it matches up with the quality and the accuracy and the push to our society, that we make so many of the things Dr. King stood for, he and others stood for, a reality. So that when everybody walks on our courtyard and looks up at room 306 on that balcony, they know that this is a place of righteousness. This is a place where one of the most important and transformative leaders of the 21st century died, sacrificed his life for the greater good of humankind. And that when they experience this place in the motel and in our legacy building, they walk away being challenged to be their best selves, and that their head and their heart has a collision. It's an intellectual and an emotional collision that won't allow them to walk away from righteousness and justice and the ability for civil and human rights to be normalized in this country.
Thank you so much.
That's my job every day.
Thank you so much. And I apologize to our audience that we've run out of time to address the questions, and hopefully the questions that you have we can answer offline. But I thank you for joining us this afternoon for the significant discussion on the 55th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination. I hope that it has inspired you to get involved in helping find solutions to the issues that we have discussed today. And you can find out more information by going to the King Center website at thekingcenter.org and the National Civil Rights Museum at the historic Lorraine Motel at civilrightsmuseum.org. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, and I'm delighted to be with you.